Hello and welcome to the It's Your Effin' Journey podcast. My name is Melissa Hemming, and if a life coach and a therapist had a baby, he would get me. I am excited for this interview today. Right off the bat, I want to apologize. My internet at home has been absolutely awful for therapy and for podcasting, and it's no different in this episode. You know my rule. I try to do as little editing as possible because I do things perfectly imperfect around here. And the longer that I sort of take to do tasks that I'm bad at, such as editing, the longer it takes to get things out into the world that I think are worthy of being shared. So, just in case you're new here, I do not have anyone that helps me with this podcast. This is a one-woman show. And as I said, if I sort of waited to edit episodes, it's not a strength of mine. I would rarely get these things out, and this conversation is so good, and I really loved talking with Martha. She is the author of Attuned Exercise. Her information is in the show notes. You can find her on Instagram. It's such a great book. It's not, like, sometimes books are like overwhelming or just big. This is like a very short, concise, great read about changing your mindset around exercise and how you feel about your body and how you feel about movement. So I really think you're going to enjoy this one. And I'm so grateful for her for sticking it out with me and dealing with my bad internet. It's so funny. I have to call Frontier today and say, you better fix my internet because I work from home and my podcast depends on it, and so do my therapy clients. So annoying when like someone is divulging their innermost thoughts and secrets, and like Melissa's disappeared because the internet is bad. Like, this is 2026. I should be able to have internet that consistently works. So rant over. Let's bring it to Martha. Obviously, in the show notes, you can find how to contact her, as I said. Also, you can join the Positive Pickle Club. We just had our monthly group coaching session, and it's so good to have that structured time and accountability to take care of yourself. Every time I have one, I'm like, oh, I need this more. So definitely join the Positive Pickle Club. I'd love to see you in there. And without further ado, what time is it? Podcast time. It's a celebration. What time is it? Podcast time. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the It's Your Effin' Journey podcast, Martha. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Melissa. I'm excited.
So, Martha is the author of Attuned Exercise, which I had the privilege of reading the last couple weeks, and what a great read. Like, totally right up my alley. Everything. Tell me about...
Yeah, thanks so much.
What I want to know what brought you to this place of writing this book, and I just want to hear all about your story because I think it's obviously fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, growing up, I was not an athletic kid at all. Like, I was way more likely to be picking dandelions in the outfield, and like certainly picked last in gym class, like on the regular. Just, not an overall athletic kid, but I was pretty active. I liked swimming, I liked climbing trees and playing skipping with friends and stuff like that. But I wasn't what you would call like a sporty kid. And then after I finished high school and I got sort of my first job, I worked full-time at a gym when I was 18 is when I started in the fitness industry, which for me is about 20 years ago. And it was really interesting because, you get a free membership and all of a sudden I'm going to try these classes. I'm going to kind of explore this whole world that was there. And there was kind of this, like a little bit of a tension there because on one hand, it was like, oh, this feels really cool and it feels empowering to feel strong. But on the other hand, a lot of it was very like diet and weight oriented. And when I started to get exposed to these women's health magazine, it was like, 10 ways to make your dinner healthier. And they were all ways to eat less. And so that was a very kind of confusing world to be dropped into, really, as a teenager still. And so at that time, I worked at the front desk, and the manager was like, "Oh, have you ever thought about being a personal trainer?" I was kind of, maybe at some point. And then when I was in university, I was like, "Oh, maybe I will go and do that certification. I'm kind of familiar with that world. And, that sounds better than getting, a job in the mall, or like other friends were doing at that time." And, I really got into it, and I was living in Toronto, in the big city kind of thing, teaching all kinds of classes, doing personal training, teaching boot camp classes in the park at 6 a.m. And then I started working in a physiotherapy clinic, teaching Pilates, which was really interesting. And I got really curious about how people related to exercise. Like, I knew there was some tension in my own relationship with exercise, even though I really loved it and was getting a lot from it. And so I got really curious about what that was about. So I started taking, some graduate courses in sports and exercise psychology. And that was really interesting, especially in relation to, folks I'd have in the physio clinic who'd be, really wanting to get better, but had a hard time doing exercises consistently, or kind of the opposite, where you're like, okay, you need to like scale it back for a bit, and then they'd way overdo it. And it's like, okay, there's a lot more going on under the surface than, what we're commonly thinking about as motivation, and the way that we were taught during my personal training certification. Like, okay, it's a goal, you reverse engineer it, and like, Bob's your uncle, right? It's like it's a lot more complicated than that. So it was through that I got introduced to positive psychology, which I was like, okay, that's really cool. This kind of well-being angle. I was like, that's really aligned with what I'm interested in. And so, during COVID time, when the fitness businesses of the world, we were all closed, I was like, okay, this is a good time to go a little bit further with this. And I'd been really, over maybe the year or so before that, going on a real journey of unpacking diet culture. Through kind of this postpartum period after my daughter was born, and really reevaluating my own relationship with exercise, made me really want to dig into these other perspectives. So I was really into, learning more about intuitive eating and anti-diet and anti-oppressive and more inclusive versions of fitness, and kind of just this really more holistic vision. And I'd sort of created this course at that time that was about fitness mindset, and like understand what are some of these limiting beliefs or beliefs that we have about ourselves as exercisers that are kind of getting in the way of what we're hoping to achieve. Because I think, I don't think there's anybody right now that doesn't know that exercise is good for them.
Yeah.
And right, it's not like 50 years ago where people are like, oh, I don't know, right? Like we've known that. We know that exercise is good for us, and we either do it, or we want to do it, or we want to do it, right? There's this general awareness of kind of the health side of it. But that's not really motivation enough. And I don't think it's the fact that it's motivation enough. I think that it's being told that exercise is good for your health feels really great if you're already doing it. And if you're not, it tends to make you feel worse.
Yeah.
So I jumped into this master's in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology. And I was like, okay, I really want to figure out what's been done in research about this relationship of diet culture and exercise. And sort of my theory going in was that we need to dial down diet culture and dial up well-being. That was sort of this toggle that I was imagining. And so I found a lot of research that was about body esteem or aesthetic cueing in a class. But then I finally stumbled on this little corner of research on the developmental theory of embodiment by Neva Perron at OISE, which is in Toronto, where she and her colleagues looked at the developmental experience of existing in a body in the world for women and girls through the lifespan. And so this lifespan lens of interviewing people, for the girls, they were, between 9 and 12 at the start, and they interviewed them every year for 5 years for qualitative interviews. Then interviews with young women in their 20s and early 30s, and then interviews with older women in their 40s through 60s. So really this kind of lifespan perspective that nobody had done before. And so it came together to be this really holistic model that the ways in which we experience being a body in the world are not all separate things, right? And in quantitative research, we have to narrow things down to what's the smallest, most measurable thing. But then we can lose sight of kind of that bigger picture, that the way that we feel comfortable and at home in our body is not separate from our eating behavior, and whether we feel like we can trust our hunger and fullness cues versus, societal messages of shrinking ourselves and having to always control. It's not separate from the way we navigate our gender and our sexual agency in the world. It's not separate from how we are able to self-care and not self-care, including exercise. And this sort of spectrum of exercise for control and body manipulation, particularly focused on aesthetics like weight, versus being attuned to the body. And so all of these dimensions of our physical self are so intrinsically related. And so when I was reading this body of research, I was like, yeah, that's it. That's what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm hearing with clients when I lost it. Send a message.
Keep going. I'm here.
And we're back.
So I heard you right until
Can you
all
hear
of
me?
these ways.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Okay. Let me screw the.
No, we're back.
Good. Okay. Okay. All of the ways
Okay,
the body.
I was on a roll.
I know. I love it. Keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah. I have no idea where we cut off.
Just all the ways the body. That's where.
Okay. So all the ways that we experience being a body in the world, navigating our social context, are all related. They're not separate. So our sense of body connection and comfort, whether we feel like our body is a comfortable and positive place to be versus something we want to disconnect from, whether we feel like our body is a source of our agency and expression in the world versus something that needs to be kind of controlled and be as small and quiet and polite as possible, whether we can trust our appetite for food and hunger and fullness, our bodily signals for rest and recovery, whether we are attuned to our sexuality and the way that we're encouraged to perform gender and sexiness in the world as an object of gaze, and how objectification is a dynamic around us, but also something that we internalize as something that we must do, and the way that we view our self-care activities. So with exercise, it's like exercise is something that you do to the body to try to shape it to this societal standard, right? Would be an experience of disconnection or negative experiences of embodiment versus a positive experience where it's attuning to the physical self. And so I was so happy when I discovered this area of research, because I was like, this is exactly what people are talking about. When I ask people, tell me about your relationship with exercise, I get all of these narratives and all of these stories of well, I tried this diet and I was pushing myself and I did, all of these dynamics about, that body image is not separate from the relationship with exercise, that our relationship with food is not separate from our relationship with exercise. Our, the way that we feel comfortable as ourself is not separate. And so that felt super meaningful. And so I did a couple of research projects looking at positive experiences of embodiment and other dimensions of well-being, and correlating them with intuitive eating and stuff like that. And so I published a few peer-reviewed journals on that. And I felt like, okay, I'm done with that as an academic project. But I have something to say. And we know with research, it's like it takes a while for it to trickle into what's happening in industry. And I really felt like man, like this is so spot on. Like I've talked to hundreds of people in my career in the fitness industry, and nobody is talking about this. Mm-hmm. Everybody is talking about push yourself, whatever, real intensity. Nobody's talking about, well, like what is your relationship with exercise? And is there a way that we can cultivate something different than the version that's kind of been handed to us and not really evaluated as to whether or not it still fits us anymore?
Yeah. Well, it's so refreshing to have these conversations, because I feel like, and I don't know what your experience is with working with people, but I find people who are in my life who do love movement and do love exercise, a lot of them are still caught in the size of it all and how much I weigh and what did I lose. And I literally, I was at music bingo the other week with friends that were talking about this, and I'm like, I was like, la 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 la, like I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about how much you're shrinking yourself or how small you are. Those conversations are so boring and archaic to me. But I do understand that a lot of people enter the physical movement space having those goals. I was one of them. I started to get active because I wanted to lose weight. And so I understand that there's a path that you can get to, but it is so hard to be around those conversations of shrinkage and how small can I be? And I want to be strong and powerful. And
yeah, for sure. And I'd say too, on my side, sorry.
No, go.
Audio's a little wonky at the minute.
You go, because I can hear you.
Sorry, the audio, can you hear me okay?
I hear you. Yeah, you're great.
Okay, yeah. So, okay, great. So, I can totally relate to that, right? Like I was super entrenched in that world too, right? Even though I loved what exercise was doing kind of for my mental health and well-being, it's very hard not to get kind of suckered into that body stuff, right? Because it's so prevalent. So there's no judgment for being kind of caught up in that. In fact, that's the default, right? So by default, that is part of our value system until we've kind of had a chance to unpack it and look at it a little bit differently. And people come to that journey at different times, right? So usually I find it's like these times of big changes in life that kind of prompt people to hey, I got to reevaluate things a little bit. Oh, and we're gone.
Prompts people.
And we're back. Yeah, most people are caught up in that because it's the most likely scenario given the world that we live in, right? And that these messages are just in the ether around us. So that even if you want to go to a gym and your focus is to get stronger, if all the marketing and the stuff around you is including dieting and weight loss and body manipulation, it's no wonder that those things sort of seep in. I think one of the things that's really helpful is that you can cross that path through a whole bunch of different pathways. And in the book I talk about, there's head knowing, heart knowing, and gut knowing. And so from the head side, more cognitively, you're if you look at the highest quality research, exercise doesn't lead to weight loss long term. So you're okay, this isn't real. And neither generally do diets lead to sustainable weight loss over the long term. And on again, off again cycle of weight gain and loss is actually really bad for our health. So you can go super analytical. You can look at the research on those types of things. If you're more a heart-oriented person, you can read really about, we're lost again. Oop. Being stuck there and feeling like there really isn't a lot of good options. I think the way that we can start to gently challenge that when people are ready to is I talk about in the book this idea of like head, heart, and gut knowing that that path isn't leading where it's promising. And so from like the head side, more like analytical, looking at the research that like large scale meta-analysis, like the most powerful research that we have, shows that exercise doesn't actually lead to weight loss, shows that dieting doesn't work and leads to poorer health outcomes and not sustainable weight loss. And then from the heart side, it's like we can understand how damaging and harmful a fat phobic world is and how we can choose to not be a part of that and to no longer embody the values that sustain systems of fat phobia in the world, whether or not it affects us personally, because people have very different amounts of body privilege. We can understand from our gut, from our own personal experience, that you're like, man, if I total up all of these fits and spurts with exercise and the diets that I've tried and all these things that I've done, has it ever actually given me what it promised in a way that felt good and sustainable? And I think that, we're like, no, it doesn't. You're like, if it does make you feel good, it's very short-lived and kind of is this like dive in, do too much, burn out, feel worse about yourself kind of cycle, right? So that's really what Attuned Exercise is doing, is that there's a totally different way to approach this, and where not only can we have a version of exercise that isn't enmeshed with diet culture, it can be one that's so much more, that's about like really embodying and connecting with your physical self, which has that crossover benefit into all of these other domains of our embodied life, which I think is really important. But when people are ready for this work, when they're ready for it,
Yeah.
it's not the kind of thing that you can be like, hey, you know what? You're wrong. When people are, in their diet talk, you can gently, depending on if they're close friends, be like, hey, you know what? I like you no matter what you weigh.
That's what I do. I just try to be the other
true.
voice of like, of encouraging people to focus on what their bodies can do for them and what they have done instead of the size of them. But yeah, you're right. There's only so much that you can do. And like, we have to talk about my favorite part of the book, which is that park bench and bus bench, because I loved that analogy, and the minute I read it, I was like, oh my god, like I am a park bench exerciser. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So this analogy comes from a trainer named Dan John, who's really well established in the strength and conditioning world. So he's like really this top-notch, well-known guy. So I think that matters too when people are thinking like, oh, there's all these like fringe movements in fitness. It's like, well, not really. So the analogy he gives us is that, when you're sitting on the bus bench, it's because you're waiting for the bus. You want to get somewhere at a specific time, and like there's, I'm waiting for this specific bus to bring me to this specific location. But when we're sitting on a park bench, we're just enjoying the view. We're enjoying being there. It's for its own sake. And with exercise, a bus bench workout or a program could be, okay, I've got, a 12-week program leading up to a race, or I'm doing, an 8-week conditioning cycle, or I'm doing, a strength training program for the next 2 months, right? There's a specific goal and there's a specific kind of timeline. And because of that, there's more structure. Whereas a park bench workout is just anything that you like to do that's physical, that gives you some variety, that's like fun to do, and that is just for its own sake. And what Dan John talks about is that over the course of your fitness life, you should be spending about 80% of your time on the park bench, and only this smaller chunk of time on, if you want to, I would add, on sort of bus bench goal-oriented work. And so that the purpose of exercise isn't always so that it's part of a program. And I feel like I felt like that when I first got into exercise. I'd been exercising regularly, but just doing whatever I liked, jumping into a class here or there, doing some YouTube videos, whatever. And I was really enjoying it. And then when I learned about programming and whatever, I felt like, oh, I must have been wasting my time doing that. But I really wasn't, because I was enjoying myself and I was building a relationship with exercise and myself as an exerciser in that process, as well as getting a lot more variety. When we're doing a really focused program, and it tends to be kind of more repetitive movements, which can be harder on the body as well. But just require a lot more motivation. And I'll share for myself, I've done both kind of endurance sports and strength sports. I competed in weightlifting and I did triathlons and marathons. And you're like, okay, yeah, if you want to do those things, you need a good chunk of time. But if you're always pushing, you're going to be burnt out and you're not going to, feel that motivation. That can be really hard for people. I remember feeling I had this season where I did maybe 6 or 7 triathlons and I really pushed myself, and the longest one was a half Ironman. So it was a full-on thing. Wow, yeah. And when I finished, I had no motivation for months. And it was almost an identity crisis, because you feel like so much of your life has been dedicated to this thing. And you're like, oh, well, am I a runner if I don't run right now? Or, or am I a triathlete if I don't feel like training? It's this whole, where your sense of self gets wrapped up in it, when it doesn't have to be that. And, coming to this balance where it doesn't have to be super focused all the time. You can just move in ways that feel good. And I think that for me that's the well-being side, is that it's for your well-being, to boost your mood, to feel, maybe more regulated in your body, to feel energized. And, for me, when I was in university, man, it was I'm getting out of my head space and I'm dropping into my body. And that being so important. And you're it doesn't matter what it is. And I don't want to feel like my body is trashed at the end of it, the way it can if you're in a hard training cycle.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I'm obsessed with paddleboarding when it's not 12 degrees outside. And it's so funny because I go on my paddleboard whenever I get the opportunity. And that can look like me laying and meditating on my paddleboard. It can look like I've brought Subway sandwiches, I've journaled, and it has literally 0% to do with exercise. But it's so funny because people will see me and they'll be like, oh, you're not standing up. Oh, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. They connect that activity with me, rowing my little heart out down the river. And I'm like, this is my Zen time. It's not for exercise,
Yeah, exactly. And it's that permission slip for your movement life to look a bit different than what people might expect is so relieving. We have these beliefs that oh, it only has value if you're doing it for this amount of time and for this long and at this intensity, when really those types of restorative things, whether oh, we're gone again.
Restorative.
Hello.
Restorative. That was the last word I heard.
Yeah. So we want things that are restorative as well, right? And that these beliefs that we have that movement only has value if it's this amount of time and this intensity and these types of things, really limit us, because it puts us in a box, and we feel oh, well, it's not worth going out on the paddleboard unless I'm getting a sweat on and, whatever, when really just getting out there is tremendously beneficial to your mental health and well-being, right? Yeah. Or that oh, it's not worth that little walk around the block because I only have 10 minutes today, right? Today I didn't have an hour to do a workout, but I was you know what, I'll do 20 minutes on the treadmill, mostly walking, couple short intervals. It's good. And that flexibility allows you to support your well-being a lot more, but it also ironically helps you be a lot more consistent. And I think that people misconstrue consistency as having to be like consistently motivated and consistently intense, when really it can just be showing up for yourself. And maybe some days your energy and capacity is, I'm just going to go float around and eat a Subway sandwich, and that's going to be really good for my well-being. But it
Yeah.
maintains that connection to yourself, that like this activity is something that feels good and adds value to my day and is, you know, restorative to the entire soma, right? That's so important. In the book, I say when we're more generous with our definition of exercise, we lose nothing and we gain a lot.
Yes. And I mean, I think it goes hand in hand with like running and intervals and walking while you run. This is something I talk about a lot because I feel like there's so much misconception about the impact of walking while you're running. And there's this, you know, for non-runners who see you walking, and you know, even when you're running a race and I'm doing an interval and you have the people cheering you on and they're like, "Come on, dig deep." And I'm always like, this is part of it for me. Like, but they don't understand, you
Yeah.
know?
Like this is on purpose.
Yes, this is very intentional.
Yeah, totally, right? And I think that like, you know, I mean there's that inside and outside perspective, but there's also people like, you know, in you know, the running community who would like to discount things. But it's
Yeah.
like, but if the purpose of doing it is for yourself, and that this is a strategy that helps you feel better while doing it, why wouldn't you? I mean, not to mention the fact that there's all kinds of research for, you know, using walk intervals strategically. Like that's there is tons of support for that. But I think it's also super helpful to our relationship with exercise when it doesn't suck as much. That like
Yes.
when I add some walk intervals, it's not so horrible. And, you know, like it doesn't have to be, you know, the relationship with running doesn't have to be always pushing through discomfort, always kind of vaguely dissociating because your body is telling you to stop, right? It can be, okay, I'm going to run and I'm going to do, you know, this many minutes or this many miles, and then I'm going to walk for a little bit and let the heart rate come down and let the body kind of relax a little bit. And like, I mean, I did that with my, when I was doing running too, I always included some walk intervals, especially with triathlons. You got to eat and stuff too. You can't eat while you're running at pace, like walk a bit and eat your food, right?
Yeah.
You know, at minimum, right? And so I think that that's so important. I also had a marathon where I was finishing up the last little bit, but I was doing a walk section. And someone's like, "There's only 1 mile, just run." It's like, get out of here, man. Like, are you kidding me? Like, oh.
That's the worst. Like they think you've given up and you're just like, no, this is my strategy.
This is what I'm doing, right? And you're like, how about you do this?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So what do you do like tell me about the work that you do with people?
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on where people are at in the journey. So a lot of what we do is we look at, okay, what's been the relationship with exercise. Like one of my favorite activities to do is have people kind of draw out this like timeline of your life and what all the different kind of things that you've done and the identity that's related to that, right? Whether you have an athletic past or not, whether exercise has really been tied to performance or aesthetics, and kind of start to tease out some of those pieces. What were the messages that you heard kind of growing up around exercise, but also around bodies and control, and these things are so closely tied, and this overall tension between control versus freedom is a really big one. And then, and this is like kind of in, I do one-to-one coaching, and I'd like to later this year do some groups as well. I think there's a really special thing that happens in groups when people are working on the same type of stuff. But to kind of be witnessed for what that journey has been and acknowledge that it's not that simple. I think that that's really helpful for people, that, you know, it's not just motivation and like do it. And like, that the relationship with exercise is actually really complex, and it's been this lifelong thing, I think is tremendously hopeful. And then depending on where people are at, they might be doing exercise already, or they might not be. And so in the book I talk about, and it's the same sort of process that I do with clients, of which is like, what's one experiment, the smallest experiment that you can try this week, and sort of start that feedback loop. Is we need to be trying stuff in order to get feedback for what feels good. But it's not about that, willpower and push hard. So, for somebody who's not active, it might be like, okay, a few times this week, I'm going to put on music and I'm going to dance, or I might, schedule with a friend to go on a walk together, or whatever. Like, it really depends on where a person's at and what their current level of abilities are. If they're somebody who has a lot of pain, then it might be, okay, I'm going to book an appointment with a physio to get this, shoulder thing checked out that I've been avoiding, or whatever. So it really depends on kind of where people are at. I'll also talk to people who are very athletic and have more of a tendency to push themselves too hard, who want to start to be a little bit more attuned. And it might be, okay, this week the focus is going to be, I'm going to notice what my breathing is like when I'm exercising. Am I nose breathing, or am I going to mouth breathing? Or it might be, how can I notice what's my intensity at certain times on a scale of 1 to 10? Or when is my tendency to push through discomfort versus listen to it and adjust, right? So it's
So very mindful.
Yeah, it's mindful, and I think that's one of the pieces of feedback that I got when when people were first reading the book, was that it helped them see that mindfulness and movement isn't only for specifically mindfulness type practices like yoga, or really kind of where the intention, or even Pilates, where the intention is that mindfulness, and that we can bring some of that mindfulness to all of our physical things that we're doing. And depending on how connected to your body you are, right? Some people are hypersensitive and feel all of the things and are very connected to their physiological cues. Other people are like, I have no idea what you mean when you say listen to your body, because the no signal coming through, right? That's going to kind of be different types of things to explore. But just even noticing, what feels like yes versus what feels like no, what feels like okay to your body, right? I talk about that in the book. When you imagine all these different activities, what's an immediate yes and what's an immediate no? Like for you, hey, do you want to go paddleboarding tomorrow? Might be immediate yes. That's a hard yes. If it's do you want to go play pickleball tomorrow? It might be maybe, and just start to notice what the idea of certain activities feels like for you. And if something has felt like a no, it doesn't mean that you can never do that. If you're okay, lifting weights feels like no, then okay, what's that about? And where has that come from? And you're oh, every time in the past when I did weights, I did every exercise I know, as many reps as I could, and I hurt, and I didn't like how I felt in my body. And you're okay, cool. So how about maybe we could explore a different way of doing that thing that does, but staying in that zone that feels okay, and not pushing to where you feel like it's a threat to your body or a threat to your self-efficacy if you can't do it. And I mean, from, working as a therapist and as a coach, it's if you did the activity, great, let's talk about it. You didn't do the activity, great, let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Either way, there's going to be something useful. If somebody chooses a certain kind of quote unquote homework to try, and then they don't do it, that's going to be an equally interesting space to explore. And so in the work that I do now, I'm not a personal trainer, but I have that experience. So to help people kind of figure out some of these things, I can draw on a little bit of that knowledge too. But it's primarily like it's a talk space to kind of explore kind of the narrative and the relationships that are going on around that.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I'm a running coach, but that's not like my jam. But I can tie into that knowledge to help people, if they need it. That's so interesting. So what is like next for you? What are you doing physically now?
Yeah, so physically now, I kind of do a little bit of the Dan John thing. So my focus over the past kind of couple of years has been building my strength back. So I had a concussion in 2021 that took me a really long time to recover from. I had post-concussion syndrome and a lot of chronic pain that it took a couple of years to feel like I could do anything. And it's such an ego situation, right? Like I used to compete in weightlifting and snatch or clean and jerk over my body weight, over my head a bunch of times every day. To like, I had to drive to the store and buy like the 2-pound dumbbells to really build back my capacity from nothing because I had exercise intolerance as part of my symptoms. And so it's been a gradual process of coming back to that. So over the past year, my main priority has been to build some strength back while also keeping some cardio up. And so I sort of follow this Dan John thing. So the last couple of years, I've kind of booked a 5K around like April or May so that there's a cardio focus for a few months and keeping the strength stuff kind of at maintenance. And then I sort of switched that to, okay, for cardio things, I'm just going to do walks with friends, things in nature, summertime activities kind of through the summertime, maybe some paddle boarding or kayaking, that type of fun stuff. And then focus that for strength on maintaining and then slowly building. But it's I'm very intuitive in all of the workouts that I do, that like I have, like in the book, I talk about supportive structure. Like I have a general structure to my strength program, but all of the sets and reps are pretty fluid based on the day and how my body feels. Because that's been hard won. That like, to me, it's absolutely not worth it to push to do a heavier weight, even if I did it a couple weeks ago. Like there's no ego to prove it because the risk of injury is not worth it in this chapter to take that step back. Right. So I'd say that's kind of what I like to do. The other thing I love to do is I love to dance. So really the last 6 months I've been inviting more dancing back into my life. And like you mentioned with paddleboarding, it's not like, oh, I'm going to a workout. Like I went to a dance weekend this past weekend and I was not doing a workout. I was just dancing with friends and listening to amazing music and being out and being social and being around people. And I happened to get a whole boatload of steps in. And it was incidental to doing something that felt amazing and fun and community and all of those other aspects, right? And I think that the more kind of other things we can build into our movement, the better. Like if there's a nature component or a social component or all of these other things, that's so helpful.
Yeah. So you made me think of a question I want to ask, because when you were talking about how you used to do, these heavy lifts and over your shoulders and big, strong weights, how do you work with someone who has had success in an early part of their exercise journey? Because I see this a lot with runners, like runners that were really, really fast when they were younger, and now maybe they're aging and they're not so fast. And I always joke that because I started so late, I was never really good at anything anyway. So now I just can easily enjoy it. But how do you work with people who have that mentality of like what I used to do? How do you help them to embrace where they are now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm personally more similar to you, that like I was never a top athlete because I started later. And so finding that balance is a little bit easier. It's interesting working with people who've been quite athletic because there's kind of two things. One, their identity is generally pretty connected to that role, right? They're a basketball player rather than somebody who plays basketball, right? Like
Yeah.
their identity is related to performance. And probably because that was valued a lot by the people around them, and they had a lot of praise for that, a lot of success. Maybe they got paid for that, right? So there's definitely some teasing out to be done. I also think that for people who have a highly athletic background, your sense of attunement is not always that great because you kind of outsource it to your coach. Oh, we've lost you again.
Okay, maybe they got paid for it.
Yeah. So maybe they got paid for it and that was their job to be really good at it. The other dynamic that I see is that when you're a high performer, like an athlete, is that you tend to outsource a lot of your agency to your coach, right? So you don't decide what you're going to do that day. You have a coach who makes those decisions for you, who tells you, okay, today we're gonna push hard. This week's a recovery week. Like you kind of allow that other person, because they're the expert to do that. And so I find some of those folks like aren't very good at knowing how to connect to their own readiness cues, because you're like, oh, well, like I pushed through when I felt crappy and I rested when I felt good, and I lost you again.
Readiness cues. Can you hear me?
All right, we're back.
Okay, readiness cues.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So I think that dynamic of having to connect to the felt sense is sometimes not something that they've ever done, because if you're an athlete and you're trusting your coach, you're often pushing hard when you're feeling kind of run down, and then you might have a recovery week when you're actually feeling really strong, and there's a lot going on there. But it really comes down to and it really comes down to So really, I mean, for folks who've been very athletic and very performance oriented, right? Those are the kind of two main areas. It's like really either stuck aesthetically motivated or performance motivated. And we're like, okay, here's a third path of attunement and self-connection and well-being. And so it really comes down to what's the relationship that you want with exercise? What role do you want it to play in your life? What do you want it to feel like? What do you want it to mean for you? And to explore that space. And so that's where kind of, regardless of whether you're coming from a more aesthetics focus or a more performance focus, it's what's the vision? What are we orienting towards in this new chapter? And that's really the heart of what the book is about, is that we can orient towards something different, where our worth isn't defined by what we look like or what our body weight is, nor is it defined by our performance and how good we are at the things that we're choosing to do with our bodies.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Mic drop. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on today and sharing your story and sharing this amazing book with me. I feel like everyone needs to read it to just understand themselves more and pay more attention to their bodies and how they feel about the things that they're doing. And I just appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Melissa. It's been a pleasure. I knew based on all the things that you post, I'm like, we're going to have a great conversation. It's going to be so interesting. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for dealing with my shitty internet, but it was fun regardless.
It's all good. We got it done.
We did. All right. Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Oh, and I'll put your Instagram in the show notes so people
All
can
right,
follow
sounds
along
good.
and reach out to you.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Take care.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh my God.
Take
So
care. See
sorry
you.
about that.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here and listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you learned anything or loved it, feel free to take a screenshot, share it on your social media, tag me, tag Martha. Also, something really cool that I forgot to mention earlier is that I was chosen to be recognized in the April edition of the Women Who Podcast magazine. So can't wait to share more about that as I get it. But thanks again for being here. Appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.